A young nurse offered first aid to a man when he crashed his car. Unaware he is a millionaire, he falls madly in love with her. The day was getting dark when Lucy got off her shift. She was fond of carrying her first aid kit with her whenever she was working or attending public gatherings. As she walked home, tired and exhausted, a sharp screech of car wheels shattered the evening calm, followed by a deafening boom. Lucy's eyes widened as she turned toward the sound and saw a luxury black sports car smashed against a pole, smoke rising from the hood. Her heart slammed against her chest as adrenaline surged through her veins. A man lay motionless on the pavement, blood pooling beneath his leg. His body was twisted unnaturally, and the shattered glass from the windshield glinted under the dim streetlights. Without hesitation, Lucy dropped her bag and sprinted toward the scene. "Somebody call 911," she screamed, her voice shaking with urgency. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she knelt beside the injured man. His leg was bleeding profusely, and his face was deathly pale. Lucy's trembling hands opened the first aid kit with practiced ease, the contents spilling slightly as her fingers fumbled to grab the gauze. She pressed a cloth against the deep wound on his leg, trying to steady her breathing. "Come on, stay with me," she whispered. The man's dark hair was tousled and stuck to his forehead. A faint scar ran down his temple, adding to the sharpness of his otherwise striking features. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open, hazel and intense, as his gaze met Lucy's. His breath hitched as his lips barely parted. "You're going to be okay," Lucy whispered, her voice soft but sure. "Thank you," the man murmured, his voice weak but clear. Lucy adjusted the pressure on the wound, feeling the heat of his blood seeping into the cloth. Her hands were shaking, but her mind remained sharp. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, and relief washed over her as flashing red and blue lights reflected on the broken glass. Paramedics rushed toward them, and Lucy reluctantly let go of his hand as they took over. "Do you know his name?" one of the paramedics asked. Lucy shook her head. "No, he just woke up." The man's eyes were starting to close again, his breathing shallow. "We need to get him to the hospital now," the paramedic said. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, the man's hand brushed against Lucy's. His eyes flickered open again. "Don't leave," he whispered, barely audible over the noise of the street. Lucy hesitated for a brief second before stepping toward the ambulance. "I'm coming with you," she said. The ride to the hospital was quiet except for the beeping of the heart monitor and the low hum of the road beneath the tires. Lucy sat beside the man, her hands clenched on her lap. His face was calm now, his breathing steadier. She watched his chest rise and fall beneath the oxygen mask. A strange pull settled deep in her chest, an unspoken connection. When they arrived at the hospital, the staff moved quickly. Lucy stayed just outside the emergency room, biting her lip as the doors swung closed behind the stretcher. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and a strange emptiness. A nurse approached her some time later. "He's stable," she said with a small smile. Lucy exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Can I see him?" The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment." Lucy stepped into the dimly lit recovery room. The man lay still, his leg wrapped in thick bandages. His dark lashes rested against his cheeks, and his face looked softer now in sleep. She hesitated at the edge of the bed before stepping closer. As if sensing her presence, his eyes fluttered open. He blinked slowly, then his gaze sharpened when he saw her. "You stayed," he said, his voice soft. Lucy smiled. "Of course." His lips curled into a weak smile. "I'm James," he whispered. "Lucy." James's eyes softened. "Thank you, Lucy." Lucy smiled faintly. "Rest. You're going to be okay." The nurse returned a moment later. "He needs to rest now," she said gently. Lucy nodded and started to step back when James's hand brushed against hers. His fingers curled slightly around hers. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Lucy hesitated, her heart beating faster. "I'll be nearby." James's hand relaxed, and his eyes drifted closed. Lucy left the room, her heart fluttering strangely as she walked down the hallway. There was something about him, something familiar and yet completely unknown, that pulled at her. Lucy sat beside the hospital bed, her hands clasped together, fingers twisting nervously. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow from the overhead light casting a golden hue over the stark white walls. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the air, a steady reminder that the man in the bed was very much alive, thanks to her. James Carter lay propped up against the pillows, his dark hair slightly tousled. His eyes, hazel and sharp even under the shadow of exhaustion, were fixed on her. There was a softness in his gaze, a vulnerability that made Lucy's chest tighten. I owe you my life, he said, his voice low and rough, strained from the ordeal. Lucy smiled faintly and shrugged, trying to brush off the weight of his gratitude. Just doing my job, she said softly. James's eyes remained on her, searching her face as if trying to understand how someone so composed and calm could have saved him from the chaos of that accident. His hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing against hers where they rested on the side of the bed. Lucy felt a jolt run through her at the brief contact, a sudden warmth that climbed up her arm and settled in her chest. The door opened, breaking the fragile moment. A nurse walked in, holding a file. "Miss Williams?" she said, handing it over. Lucy took the file and glanced down at the name printed at the top. Her eyes widened. James Carter. Her head shot up. James Carter? The James Carter? The billionaire businessman whose face often graced the covers of financial magazines and news headlines? The man who owned a string of successful companies and was rumored to be one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country? Her gaze flicked back to James, who was watching her reaction with quiet amusement. "Yes, that James Carter," he said, a teasing smile touching his lips. Lucy's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her heart raced, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity swirling within her. "You didn't know who I was?" James asked, his smile widening. Lucy shook her head slowly. "No. I mean, I wasn't exactly thinking about Forbes lists when I was trying to keep you from bleeding out." James chuckled, the sound low and warm. His hand brushed against hers again, lingering this time. "Well," he said, "maybe that's why I'm so comfortable talking to you." Lucy smiled, her cheeks warming. "Don't get used to it." James's gaze softened. "I think I might already be." For the next few hours, Lucy sat beside him as he rested. James drifted in and out of sleep, but whenever his eyes opened, they searched for her, as though her presence steadied him. Lucy found herself drawn to him more than she wanted to admit. There was something beneath the polished exterior, beneath the headlines and the wealth, something genuine. A few days later, James was moved to a private room. His recovery was progressing well, and Lucy continued to check on him. She told herself it was just part of the job, that she was being professional, but deep down, she knew better. One afternoon, as Lucy was finishing her rounds, she heard James's voice down the hall. "Lucy." She hesitated before stepping into his room. James was sitting up, his legs still wrapped in bandages, but his color had returned. His hair was neatly combed, and despite the hospital gown, he managed to look effortlessly composed. "Hey," Lucy said. James smiled. "Hey, you're looking better. Must be the company," James replied, his gaze playful. Lucy rolled her eyes but smiled. "How's the leg?" "Sore, but manageable." Lucy stepped closer. James's eyes followed her as she approached his bedside. He lifted his hand, offering it to her. Without thinking, Lucy took it. His fingers curled around hers, and Lucy's heart skipped. "I wanted to thank you properly," James said. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Lucy replied softly. James's eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of emotion beneath the surface. "Still, I'd like to try." Lucy hesitated. "What do you mean?" James smiled faintly. "When I get out of here, let me take you to dinner." Lucy's eyes widened. "Dinner?" James shrugged. "Or coffee, if that's too much pressure." Lucy bit her lip. "You really don't have to. I want to," James said, his voice low. Lucy's heart raced. The rational part of her mind told her to step back, to remind herself that James Carter was a billionaire, that he lived in a completely different world than hers. But the look in his eyes, warm and sincere, silenced that voice. "Okay," she said finally. James's smile widened. "Good." Over the next week, James's recovery continued. Lucy visited him regularly, sometimes under the guise of checking his charts, other times because she couldn't resist seeing him. Their conversations deepened. James was charming and quick-witted, but also surprisingly open. He spoke about his work, the pressure of managing an empire, the loneliness that came with it. "People assume I have it all," James said one evening as Lucy sat beside him. "But most of the time, it feels empty." Lucy's chest tightened. "You're not alone now," she said quietly. James's eyes met hers, intense and steady. "No," he said softly. "I'm not." When the day of his discharge arrived, Lucy walked him to the hospital entrance. James stood carefully, leaning slightly on his crutch. "So, about that dinner," James said. Lucy smiled. "You're really not going to let that go, are you?" James's eyes sparkled. Nope. Lucy bit her lip. Fine. But nothing fancy. James's smile widened. Deal. James stepped out of the hospital, the afternoon sun casting a soft glow on his face. He was dressed casually, a simple white shirt, dark jeans, and a leather jacket, but there was an effortless charm in the way he carried himself. Despite the relaxed outfit, he still radiated wealth and quiet confidence. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and a faint scar on his temple gave him a rugged edge that only seemed to enhance his striking features. Lucy stood a few feet away, waiting for her ride. She had just finished her shift, her nurse's uniform slightly wrinkled from the long day. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail, but a few loose strands framed her face. She was trying to steady the flutter in her chest, pretending not to notice James walking toward her, but her heart had other plans. Lucy. She looked up, and their eyes met. His hazel gaze was steady, his smile soft. Can I buy you coffee sometime? James asked, his voice smooth and low. As a thank you for saving my life? Lucy's eyes widened. Her heart stumbled over itself, and for a brief second, she thought she might have misheard him. James Carter, billionaire, the man who could have anything, was standing in front of her, asking for her number. Lucy tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, trying to sound casual despite the rapid beating of her heart. Sure, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James's smile widened. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Lucy hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her fingers brushed against his as she keyed in her number, her touch lingering a second too long. When she handed the phone back, James's eyes softened as he glanced at the screen. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the kind of luxury vehicle that screamed wealth and power. A suited chauffeur stepped out, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door. James didn't move immediately. He stood there, looking at Lucy as though he wasn't quite ready to leave. See you soon, he said, his gaze lingering on hers. Lucy smiled, her cheeks warming. See you soon. James hesitated for a heartbeat before stepping into the car. The chauffeur closed the door behind him and slid into the driver's seat. Lucy stood on the sidewalk, watching as the car pulled away and disappeared down the street. She exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. She touched her phone, where James's number now sat in her contacts list. What just happened? Lucy had always been practical. She knew her place in the world, and it wasn't anywhere near the orbit of men like James Carter. And yet, a soft smile played on her lips as she walked toward the bus stop. The weight of her exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a lightness in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting, this quiet moment outside the hospital, was about to change everything. The rooftop restaurant glowed with warm lights, casting a soft golden hue over the tables dressed in crisp white linens. The city skyline stretched endlessly in the background, a sea of twinkling lights beneath the dark sky. The faint hum of soft jazz music floated through the air, mingling with the quiet murmur of conversation and the distant sound of clinking glasses. Lucy stood at the entrance, taking a steadying breath as she adjusted the thin strap of her black dress. The dress was simple, yet it hugged her figure perfectly, flowing down to her knees. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and a delicate silver pendant rested just above the neckline of her dress. Her heart hammered beneath her ribs as her eyes swept over the restaurant, until they landed on James. He was standing near the edge of the rooftop, his back turned toward the city skyline. The glow of the lights caught the edges of his profile, sharp jawline, tousled dark hair, broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored navy suit. When he turned and saw her, his face lit up with a quiet smile. You clean up nice, James teased as she approached, his eyes gleaming. Lucy smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You're not so bad yourself. James pulled out her chair with a smooth gesture. Sit. Lucy slid into the chair, her pulse quickening as James took the seat across from her. A waiter appeared almost instantly, pouring them both a glass of red wine before disappearing into the background. James leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm glad you came. Lucy smiled. I almost didn't. James raised an eyebrow. Why? Lucy hesitated, her fingers brushing the stem of her glass. Because you're, well, you. James's smile faded slightly, replaced by quiet understanding. And what does that mean? Lucy sighed. You're James Carter, billionaire, businessman, the kind of person who makes headlines. I'm just a nurse. James finished. Lucy nodded. James leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You're not just anything, Lucy. Her cheeks warmed, and she glanced down at her wine glass to steady herself. James was so composed, so confident, and yet there was a softness in his eyes when he looked at her that made her feel like the only person in the world. Their conversation flowed naturally as the evening unfolded. James asked about her work, and Lucy told him stories about long shifts and difficult patience, and the small victories that made it all worthwhile. James listened intently, his gaze never wavering from her face. "And what about you?" Lucy asked after a while, setting down her glass. James's expression darkened slightly. He hesitated, his fingers toying with the edge of his napkin. "You don't have to talk about it," Lucy said softly. James's eyes met hers, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the carefully constructed exterior. "No, I want to." He exhaled slowly. "My parents died when I was 16. A car accident." Lucy's chest tightened. "James? I'm so sorry." James's jaw tensed. It was sudden. My father had built the company from nothing. Overnight, it all fell to me. I was barely old enough to drive, and suddenly I was expected to run a billion-dollar empire. Lucy reached across the table, hesitating before letting her hand rest over his. James's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers brushing lightly against her palm. "That's a lot for anyone," Lucy said. James's eyes darkened. "I had help, lawyers, advisors, but the pressure was suffocating. Everyone expected me to fail." "But you didn't," Lucy said. James's smile was thin. "I couldn't afford to." Lucy's thumb brushed over his knuckles. "You don't have to carry it alone." James's gaze sharpened. His fingers tightened around hers, his grip steady but warm. "I've never had someone tell me that before," he whispered. Lucy's heart fluttered. She watched the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, the part of him that wasn't the businessman or the billionaire, just a man who had been carrying the weight of the world alone for far too long. The air between them thickened. James's eyes drifted to her lips before returning to her gaze. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he leaned in. Lucy's breath caught as his hand moved to the side of her face, his thumb brushing gently along her cheek. "I don't want to scare you off," James said, his voice low. "You're not," Lucy whispered. James's mouth curved into a soft smile. "Good." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. Lucy's heart raced. "And then, would you like dessert?" Lucy nearly jumped at the waiter's sudden appearance. James smiled, his hand slipping from her face. "We're good, thanks," James said smoothly, his eyes never leaving hers. Lucy let out a shaky breath as the waiter disappeared. "That was awkward." James chuckled. "Perfect timing." Lucy laughed, her shoulders relaxing. James's hand remained over hers on the table, his thumb lazily tracing small circles against her skin. "I like this," James said softly. "Like what?" "This. Sitting with you. Talking." Lucy smiled. "I like it too." James's eyes darkened. "I don't usually let people in, Lucy, but with you." His thumb brushed over the back of her hand. "It feels easy." Lucy's chest tightened. "It does." James's gaze softened. "I don't want this to be just one night." Lucy's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to see where this goes," James replied. "If you're willing to give me a chance." Lucy hesitated, her heart racing. The logical part of her mind screamed that this was crazy, that their worlds were too different. But the way James was looking at her, steady and sincere, made her forget about the logic. "I'm willing," she said softly. James smiled. "Good." They lingered at the table long after their glasses were empty. The city lights sparkled behind them, but neither of them paid attention to the view. Later, James walked her to the entrance of the restaurant. The air was cool against her skin, but she barely noticed. James stood close, his hand resting lightly against her hip. "Thank you for tonight," James said. "Thank you," Lucy replied. "See you soon," he whispered. Lucy smiled, her eyes still closed. "See you soon." As James's car pulled away, Lucy stood on the sidewalk, her heart still racing. This wasn't just a date. This was the beginning of something more. Days turned into weeks as James and Lucy grew closer. A montage of shared moments played out. James and Lucy walking through the park, laughing over coffee, and sitting on a park bench as James playfully stole her fries. James introduced Lucy to his high society world, elegant galas and exclusive events, but Lucy remained grounded. One evening, James visited Lucy's modest apartment. They cooked together, laughing as Lucy smeared flour on James's cheek. He pulled her into his arms, his forehead resting against hers. "You make me feel normal," he whispered. Lucy's heart raced. James's friends began to notice his growing attachment to her. "Why her?" someone asked him. James smiled softly. Because she makes me feel human. Their bond deepened as they found comfort in each other's worlds. James's office was sleek and modern, a perfect reflection of the man himself. The walls were lined with dark wood and marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The soft hum of traffic below mixed with the distant echo of the office's central air conditioning. Everything about the space radiated power and wealth, but at that moment, Lucy felt like an intruder. She had come to surprise James with coffee, a small gesture after their incredible date the night before. She held 2 cups in a cardboard tray, smiling to herself as she stepped off the elevator and walked toward his office. Her heart fluttered at the thought of seeing him again. But as she approached the door, she heard voices inside, low, clipped tones that made her pause. "You're serious about her?" It was a man's voice, sharp and incredulous. Lucy froze at the threshold, the cheerful warmth draining from her face. She inched closer to the door, her hand tightening around the coffee cups. "You know how this looks?" the voice continued. "She's not one of us, James. Don't get distracted." Lucy's breath caught. There was a pause. James didn't respond immediately. "James?" The voice pressed. I don't know," James said finally, his tone strained. Lucy's heart dropped. A hollow ache formed in her chest, expanding with each painful beat. Her eyes stung as she stood there, coffee cooling in her hands. Her mind screamed at her to walk away, but her feet remained rooted to the floor. "She's a nice girl," the man added. "But you can't build a future with someone who doesn't understand our world." Lucy's vision blurred. Their world. She turned and walked away, her hands trembling. The coffee cups tilted in the tray, hot liquid seeping over the edges and staining her fingers, but she didn't feel it. James didn't defend her. He didn't say anything at all. That evening, Lucy stood on the edge of the sidewalk, the rain coming down in cold sheets. Her thin jacket did little to protect her from the chill, but the cold was nothing compared to the ache spreading through her chest. She heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was James. "Lucy." His voice was quiet, almost pleading. She closed her eyes, swallowing the lump in her throat before turning toward him. He was dressed in a dark coat, droplets of rain clinging to his hair and face. His eyes were heavy with something raw. Guilt, maybe, or desperation. "You didn't defend me," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. James's face tightened. "Lucy, you just stood there." Her voice broke. "You didn't even tell him he was wrong." I didn't know what to say. James's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I didn't want to make things worse." "Worse?" Lucy's eyes flashed with disbelief. "Do you know how it felt to stand there and hear that I'm not enough for you? That I don't belong?" James stepped closer. "You do belong. I swear, Lucy." "Then why didn't you say it?" James opened his mouth, but no words came out. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of his silence. Lucy's chest constricted. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "I can't be part of a life where I'm constantly trying to prove that I'm enough, that I'm not some outsider. That's not how I see you." James's voice cracked. He reached for her hand, but Lucy pulled away. "Isn't it?" James's expression twisted with anguish. "Lucy, please." Lucy stepped back. Her heart was shattering with every step, but she couldn't stop herself. "If you can't stand up for me when it matters, if you're embarrassed of what people might think, then maybe you don't love me as much as you say you do." James's breath hitched. "I'm not embarrassed of you." Lucy's voice softened, her tone hollow. "Maybe you're not, but you're ashamed of what it would mean to be with me." James's eyes widened with panic. "That's not true." "Then prove it." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the rain striking the pavement. James's hands curled at his sides, helplessness etched across his face. Lucy's breath hitched as she forced herself to take another step back. "I can't be in a relationship where I have to wonder if I'm just temporary." James's gaze darkened with pain. "You're not temporary, Lucy. You're the only thing that feels real." Lucy's voice trembled. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one fighting for us?" James's lips parted, but no sound came out. The weight of his silence crushed her. "I love you," James said finally, his voice raw. Lucy's throat tightened. "But is that enough?" James's face crumpled. He didn't have an answer. Lucy inhaled sharply, her heart breaking as she stepped backward. "Goodbye, James." James's face twisted with despair. He moved toward her, but Lucy turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement as rain slid down her cheeks. She didn't look back. James stood frozen, his breath shallow as he watched her figure disappear into the night. His reflection in the rain-slick street blended with the city lights, distorted and fragile. His chest tightened painfully as the truth settled in. He was losing the best thing in his life. And this time, he wasn't sure if he could fix it. James sat alone in his office that night, the city skyline blurred through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His jacket lay discarded over the back of a leather chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hands were buried in his hair as he stared at the empty glass of whiskey on the desk in front of him. He had faced countless boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, and high-stakes negotiations, but none of it had ever terrified him as much as the thought of losing Lucy. He had let her walk away because he had hesitated, because he had cared too much about appearances, about how things would look, instead of how things felt. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He hovered over her name, his thumb shaking as he hesitated to press call. He had always been able to fix things, with money, with power, with influence. But this wasn't something he could fix with a grand gesture or a business deal. Lucy didn't need his wealth. She needed his heart, his trust, his certainty, and he hadn't given her that when it mattered most. James exhaled shakily, setting the phone down. His chest ached. His eyes burned. He had fought for everything in his life, but he hadn't fought hard enough for her. Not yet. But that was about to change. If you enjoyed this story about James and Lucy, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more amazing content like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how the story ended. Do you think James and Lucy will find their way back to each other? Or was Lucy right to walk away after James hesitated to defend her? Let us know in the comments section below. Your opinions matter. Also, don't forget to rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. Did you feel the chemistry between James and Lucy? Did the emotional tension keep you hooked? We want to know what you think. And tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories are reaching. Whether you're from the US, UK, Asia, or anywhere else in the world, drop your location in the comments. Stay tuned for more captivating stories. And remember, love isn't always easy, but sometimes it's worth fighting for.